Enjoying the $5,000 a month, Mom? My millionaire son asked with a warm smile as he wrapped his arms around me beside the towering Christmas tree in his marble foyer. And for a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The orchestra in the ballroom downstairs continued playing soft holiday music while guests laughed over champagne and expensive catered desserts, completely unaware that my world had just tilted beneath my feet. I stared at Daniel's face, searching for some sign that he was joking, but all I saw was genuine affection mixed with confusion. "What $5,000? I asked quietly. The smile on his face faltered almost instantly. Behind him, my daughter-in-law Vanessa stopped mid-sip with her wine glass frozen near her lips. Even from several feet away, I noticed the tiny shift in her expression. It lasted less than a second, but after nearly 7 years of knowing her, I had learned to notice the small things. The controlled breathing, the tightened jaw, the quick recovery. "Mom," Daniel said with a nervous laugh, lowering his voice slightly as if I'd forgotten some private arrangement between us, "the monthly transfers. Since Dad passed, don't tell me you're still saving all of it instead of enjoying yourself." My chest tightened beneath my wool coat. Around us, the Christmas party sparkled with everything money could buy. White roses decorated the staircase. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft golden light across polished floors. A waiter passed carrying silver trays filled with lobster bites and miniature cheesecakes topped with gold flakes. Outside the massive windows, fresh snow covered the hills surrounding Daniel's estate like something from a holiday movie. But all I could think about was the overdue heating bill folded inside my purse. 3 days earlier, I had sat in my tiny apartment wearing 2 sweaters because I couldn't afford to keep the thermostat above 62 degrees. The radiator in my bedroom barely worked anymore, and I had spent most evenings wrapped in an old blanket while eating canned soup at my kitchen table. My blood pressure medication sat rationed beside the sink because the refill cost had gone up again in November. $5,000 a month would have changed everything. I looked at Daniel carefully. My son looked healthy, successful. His charcoal suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. At 38, he had become one of those men people wrote articles about online. Tech conferences, magazine interviews, private investors. He employed hundreds of people now. Sometimes when I saw his face on television, I still remembered the little boy who used to build Lego towers on our living room carpet while his father made pancakes on Sunday mornings. "Daniel," I said softly, trying to steady my voice, "I haven't received any money from you." Silence settled between us despite the music surrounding the party. Vanessa stepped closer immediately, her polished smile returning too quickly. "Margaret, sweetheart, maybe you forgot," she said gently, touching my arm with perfectly manicured fingers. "You know how confusing finances can get sometimes after a certain age." There it was. That tone. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. I felt heat rise into my face, but I kept my expression calm. Across the room, guests continued laughing near the fireplace while servers refilled crystal glasses with champagne. No one noticed the tension standing beneath the glittering Christmas lights. Daniel frowned slightly. "No, that can't be right," he said slowly. "I set everything up years ago. Automatic transfers. Vanessa even helped me organize all the paperwork after Dad died." At the mention of her name, Vanessa's hand tightened almost invisibly around her wine glass stem. "Honey," she interrupted smoothly, "this really isn't the time to discuss financial details. Your investors are waiting downstairs." But Daniel wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at me now with growing concern. "Mom," he asked quietly, "are you telling me you never got any of it?" I swallowed hard. The truth suddenly felt enormous standing there between us. "I'm telling you," I said. "That last winter I had to choose between fixing my car and paying for my prescriptions." Daniel's face lost all color. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. 24 months, 60 months, thousands upon thousands of dollars supposedly sent to me, gone somewhere else. Vanessa laughed softly then, though the sound carried no warmth. "Margaret, honestly, maybe there's some misunderstanding with the bank. These things happen all the time during the holidays." But I barely heard her anymore, because for the first time that night, I noticed something cold hiding behind her perfect smile. Something carefully controlled. Something frightened. And standing there beneath the glow of Daniel's enormous Christmas tree, while snow fell quietly outside the windows, I realized someone had been lying to my son for a very long time. I left the party earlier than everyone else that night. Vanessa offered to call me a driver, but I told her I preferred taking the bus. Her smile looked relieved when I said it. Snow drifted softly through the dark streets as I sat alone near the back of the nearly empty bus with my purse clutched tightly in my lap. Across town, people were still celebrating Christmas Eve with family dinners and glowing trees beside warm fireplaces. I watched expensive neighborhoods disappear through the frosted windows one by one until the streets became quieter and older. By the time I reached my apartment building, the snow had already started sticking to the cracked sidewalks outside. The hallway smelled faintly like old carpet and radiator heat. Someone had left a broken wreath hanging beside the mailboxes downstairs, half the plastic berries missing. I climbed the stairs slowly because the elevator had been broken since Thanksgiving. Inside my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. My tiny artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner beside the window with only one strand of white lights wrapped around it. I had stopped turning them on most nights to save electricity. The kitchen clock blinked 12:07 in green numbers while the old refrigerator hummed unevenly beside the counter. I removed my coat carefully and hung it beside the door before checking the thermostat. 61 degrees. I stared at the number for a long moment before pulling another blanket from the couch. Instead of touching the heat, my late husband Frank used to tease me for keeping the house too warm every winter. Back then we owned a small brick home outside Columbus with a fireplace and a yellow kitchen where he drank coffee every morning before work. After he died from heart failure 5 years ago, the medical bill swallowed almost everything we had saved. Selling the house had not felt like a choice. I walked to the kitchen sink and lined up my prescription bottles beside the faucet. One of them was nearly empty. I opened the cabinet above the microwave and pulled down a small notebook where I tracked every expense by hand. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, bus fare. I had learned how to stretch every dollar so carefully that some weeks I treated fresh fruit like a luxury. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the page. $5,000 a month. The number repeated in my mind like an echo. Daniel thought he had been taking care of me all this time. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table and looked around the apartment differently than before. The worn linoleum floor. The water stains spreading across the ceiling near the hallway. The old space heater beside my chair that only worked when you kicked it twice near the bottom. Suddenly, every difficult winter, every skipped meal, every sleepless night balancing overdue bills felt heavier somehow, because none of it had been necessary. Somewhere, all that money had gone somewhere while I sat here cutting coupons from grocery store flyers and pretending things were fine whenever Daniel called. I thought about Vanessa standing beside the Christmas tree earlier that evening in her silk emerald dress with diamonds glittering at her ears. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect voice. She always remembered birthdays, always mailed expensive gifts, always called me Margaret instead of Mom. At first I convinced myself she was simply different from the kind of women I grew up around. More polished, more ambitious. But sitting alone in my cold apartment that night, I remembered every missing letter. Every bank statement that never arrived. Every time Daniel said, "I am already helping you financially, Mom." And I laughed awkwardly because I thought he was confusing me with someone else. Outside my window, snow continued falling quietly beneath the streetlights, while somewhere across the city my son was probably standing beside his enormous Christmas tree wondering why his mother had looked so confused. The next morning, I woke before sunrise because the apartment was too cold to sleep properly. My knees ached as I walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle with water for instant coffee. Outside the window, the parking lot below looked pale and frozen beneath the gray December sky. Most people my age spent Christmas mornings surrounded by grandchildren and warm kitchens. I sat alone at my small table wearing wool socks and an old cardigan Frank bought me nearly 12 years earlier at a department store clearance sale. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and stared at the steam rising slowly into the dim kitchen light. Something inside me had shifted during the night. Not anger exactly. Anger burns hot and fast. This felt colder than that. Quieter. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and pulled out a stack of unopened mail secured with a rubber band. Most of it was junk advertisements and medical insurance notices, But near the bottom sat a white envelope from nearly 8 months earlier with Daniel's company logo printed in the corner. I remembered receiving it because Vanessa had called less than an hour later asking if she could stop by and help me organize paperwork. She arrived carrying pastries and expensive coffee drinks with that polished smile everyone loved so much. By the time she left, the envelope had disappeared. At the time, I assumed I had misplaced it. Now I was not so sure. I thought back carefully over the past few years, replaying conversations I once ignored. Daniel occasionally saying things like, "I hope you are treating yourself more these days, Mom." Vanessa insisting on helping me with online banking because she claimed scammers targeted seniors. The strange afternoon when my bank called asking me to verify changes to my mailing preferences, only for Vanessa to quickly explain that she had straightened everything out. After I sounded confused on the phone, my stomach tightened slowly. One memory after another began sliding into place like puzzle pieces I had spent years refusing to examine too closely. There was always some reasonable explanation at the time. Vanessa was organized, helpful, efficient. She handled details. Everyone said so. Daniel trusted her completely because she made his life easier. I walked into the living room and opened the small cabinet beside the television where I kept old family photo albums. Dust gathered along the edges because I rarely opened them anymore. The first album held photographs from Daniel's childhood, little league games, camping trips, school concerts. In nearly every picture, Daniel stood close beside Frank with the same open smile he still wore today. Honest, trusting. I sat on the couch flipping through the pages slowly until I reached photographs from his wedding day. Vanessa looked radiant in white satin beside him beneath the church lights. Even then, her smile had looked perfect, almost practiced. I remembered something Frank once said quietly after meeting her parents for the first time. "That woman knows how to perform for people," he told me while loosening his tie in our kitchen later that night. I laughed back then because I thought he meant it as a compliment. Frank noticed things about people that I often missed. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked toward the door, confused. Almost nobody visited me without calling first. When I opened it, my neighbor Mrs. Collins stood outside holding a foil-covered plate of Christmas cookies. "Merry Christmas, Margaret," she said warmly before pausing. "Oh, honey, are you feeling all right? You look pale." I forced a smile and accepted the cookies carefully. "Just tired," I told her. She glanced past me into the apartment. "Your son did not come by this year." I hesitated for only a second. "He had a party at his house last night." Mrs. Collins nodded politely, but I noticed the brief flicker in her eyes. Sympathy. The kind people give when they think your children have quietly abandoned you. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. Somewhere, deep down, a terrible thought had already started growing roots inside me. If Daniel truly believed he had been supporting me all these years, then someone close to him had been stealing not only money, but trust itself. And the only person with access to both our lives was Vanessa. 2 days after Christmas, Daniel called me just after 7 in the morning. I had been standing at the laundromat down the street waiting for my clothes to dry when his name appeared on my phone screen. The machines hummed loudly around me while snow melted off heavy boots onto the cracked tile floor. "Mom," he said immediately, his voice tense and distracted. I checked my records. I sat down slowly on the hard plastic chair beside the vending machines. "And?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause before he answered. "The transfers were real. Every month. $5,000 on the first." I closed my eyes briefly. Hearing it confirmed aloud somehow made everything worse. Around me, people folded towels and winter coats beneath flickering fluorescent lights while Christmas music played softly from an old radio near the front desk. "Where did the money go?" I asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That is the problem. According to the bank records, it went into an account connected to your name." My stomach tightened. "Connected how?" Another pause. "Vanessa helped set it up after Dad died. She said you were overwhelmed by paperwork and wanted help organizing your finances." I stared at the spinning dryers across the room while something cold settled deeper inside my chest. Frank had always handled taxes and investments while I took care of the house. After he passed, grief turned everything into fog for nearly a year. Endless forms, insurance calls, hospital bills. Vanessa had appeared during that time carrying folders, legal pads, and gentle concern in her voice. "You should not deal with this alone, Margaret." she used to tell me while sitting at my kitchen table sorting papers into neat little stacks. Let me help. At the time, I thought she was being kind. Daniel continued speaking, but his voice sounded distant now. The account had your information attached to it, Mom. Your social security number, your address history. Everything looked legitimate. I opened my eyes slowly, but not my signature. Silence. I knew immediately from his silence that he had checked already. Daniel, I said softly, did you ever actually see me receive any of this money? No, he admitted quietly. Vanessa handled most of the financial details because I travel so much. A heavy ache settled behind my ribs then. Not anger toward him. Sadness. My son had built a company worth millions, negotiated contracts across 3 countries, managed entire departments full of employees. Yet somehow he never noticed his own mother wore the same winter coat for 6 years straight. He never noticed my old car disappeared because I could not afford repairs. He never asked why I stopped visiting during bad weather after the bus routes changed. Love without attention can become its own kind of blindness. Mom, Daniel said carefully, I am coming by tonight. We need to figure this out together. Before I could answer, another voice entered faintly in the background. Vanessa. I could not hear every word, only her tone. Calm, controlled, smooth as polished glass. Then Daniel lowered his voice. She says there might have been identity theft or banking errors. I almost laughed, though nothing felt funny anymore. Identity theft, banking errors. Such clean little phrases for something that had slowly hollowed out years of my life. Of course she does, I said quietly. Daniel fell silent again. For the first time since that Christmas party, I sensed uncertainty in him where absolute trust used to live. Not certainty yet, not accusation, just doubt beginning to form hairline cracks beneath the surface. After we ended the call, I gathered my warm laundry into the basket and walked home carefully through the slush-covered sidewalks. The wind cut sharply through my gloves while traffic sprayed dirty snow near the intersections. Halfway home, I stopped beside the pharmacy window and looked at my reflection in the glass. Gray hair tucked beneath a knitted hat, thin shoulders beneath an old coat, tired eyes that suddenly looked much older than 69. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was probably sitting in her enormous kitchen beneath expensive pendant lights, rehearsing explanations before Daniel came home. But for the first time in years, I no longer felt confused. And confusion had always been her greatest weapon. Daniel arrived at my apartment just after 6 that evening carrying none of the confidence he usually seemed to wear like a second suit. Through the peephole, I barely recognized the man standing in the dim hallway outside my door. His shoulders looked tense beneath his dark wool coat, and there were deep shadows beneath his eyes as though he had not slept. Snow still clung to the edges of his shoes when I opened the door. Mom, he said quietly. I stepped aside without speaking, and he entered slowly, looking around the apartment with an expression I could not immediately name. Not disgust, not pity, something worse. Realization. The radiator clicked weakly beside the window while the old lamp near the couch cast soft yellow light across the room. Daniel stood silently for several seconds taking everything in. The stained ceiling above the hallway. The worn armchair patched near one armrest. The stack of grocery coupons beside my phone. I suddenly understood that my son had never truly seen how I lived before. Not really. You should have told me things were this bad, he said finally. I folded my hands carefully in front of me. I tried, I answered softly. But every time finances came up, you said everything was already taken care of. He looked away first. That hurt him. I could tell. Daniel removed several papers from a leather folder and spread them carefully across my kitchen table. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, account summaries. Numbers filled every page in neat rows. $5,000 transferred monthly for nearly 4 years. The total sat near the bottom in bold print. $230,000. I stared at the figure without speaking. My entire body felt strangely calm now, almost detached. Beside the paperwork sat copies of authorization forms bearing my printed name beneath signatures that looked similar enough to fool strangers, but wrong enough to make my stomach tighten. Immediately, that is not my handwriting, I said quietly. Daniel nodded once. I know. The silence between us stretched heavily. Outside, headlights passed through the blinds in pale moving stripes while distant traffic hissed across wet streets below. Vanessa says the bank probably made administrative mistakes when the account was opened, he said eventually, though even he no longer sounded convinced by the explanation. I looked up slowly. Daniel, I asked gently, do you honestly believe a bank accidentally deposited nearly $250,000 into the wrong account for 4 straight years? His jaw tightened. He sat down heavily across from me and rubbed both hands over his face like a man trying desperately to wake himself from a nightmare. I do not know what to believe anymore. That sentence lingered in the room long after he spoke it. I remembered the first time he brought Vanessa home nearly 8 years ago. She arrived carrying homemade pie and expensive wine for Frank. She laughed easily, asked thoughtful questions, remembered everyone's birthday after meeting them only once. Even Frank admitted she seemed charming. But charm can be a kind of performance when practiced long enough. There is something else, Daniel said quietly. He slid another paper toward me. My eyes moved slowly across the page until I reached the account holder information near the top. Joint account authorization. My name appeared first. Vanessa's second. A cold heaviness settled low in my chest. She had direct access. I whispered. Daniel nodded again without looking at me. The account statements were redirected electronically 3 years ago. I thought about every missing envelope, every strange phone call, every time Vanessa insisted technology confused me. My fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table while pieces of the last 4 years finally locked fully into place. Daniel stared at the paperwork as though it belonged to strangers instead of his own life. Mom, he said after a long silence. If she did this, he stopped speaking because neither of us was ready to finish the sentence aloud. If she did this, then the foundation of his marriage had been built on lies. If she did this, then every luxury surrounding their perfect life carried shadows underneath it. I reached across the table then and gently placed my hand over his trembling fingers. Daniel, I said softly, people rarely steal money first. They steal trust. The money comes after. Daniel stayed at my apartment for nearly 3 hours that night, though neither of us spoke very much after reviewing the paperwork. Sometimes silence tells the truth more honestly than words ever can. Around 9 o'clock, he stood near the kitchen window staring down at the snow-covered parking lot while his untouched coffee turned cold beside him. I keep replaying everything in my head, he said quietly. Every conversation. Every time Vanessa told me you were doing fine. I folded one of the blankets across my lap more tightly and watched him carefully. Did you ever ask me directly? I asked. He closed his eyes briefly. No, the honesty in that single word hurt more than excuses would have. Daniel had always loved me. I never doubted that. But love becomes fragile when it lives beside distraction long enough. Success had swallowed his attention piece by piece over the years until entire parts of life passed him unnoticed. Vanessa simply learned how to operate inside the spaces he stopped watching. She said you were proud, he continued softly. She told me you did not want charity after Dad passed away. Every time I offered to increase the transfers, she said you would feel embarrassed. I looked down at my hands resting quietly in my lap. The skin looked thinner now than I remembered from years ago. Time does that. It steals little things gradually enough that you barely notice until one day your own hands belong to an older woman. Your father used to say pride and dignity are not the same thing, I said after a moment. Pride hides suffering. Dignity survives it. Daniel turned away from the window then and sat heavily at the kitchen table again. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, as though the ground beneath his marriage had started cracking apart faster than he could process it. There is more, he admitted quietly. I checked some additional records before I came over. My chest tightened slightly. He slid another sheet of paper toward me. Luxury purchases, designer stores, resort reservations, jewelry invoices, large withdrawals tied directly to the joint account, carrying both my name and Vanessa's. Tens of thousands of dollars spent over several years. I stared silently at the numbers while memories surfaced one by one. Vanessa arriving at family dinners wearing another expensive bracelet. The renovated kitchen featured in magazine photographs online. The European vacations Daniel always assumed investors had paid for through business perks. She used your money, Daniel whispered, his voice rough now. All this time, she was spending money meant for you. I looked up slowly. No, I corrected gently. She was spending money meant to ease your conscience. That sentence settled heavily between us. Because deep down, I finally understood something important. The transfers had never just been financial support. They were Daniel's way of believing he was still taking care of his mother while building a life too busy to include her regularly. Vanessa had not only stolen from me, she had protected the illusion he desperately wanted to believe about himself. Outside, snow continued falling softly beneath the orange streetlights while distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. The apartment felt smaller somehow with all the truth sitting inside it now. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, both hands clasped tightly together. "What do I even do now?" he asked quietly. For the first time since he was a little boy, my son sounded lost. I thought about Vanessa carefully. Her perfect posture, her controlled voice, the polished kindness she wore around people like expensive perfume. Women like that rarely panic immediately. They adapt, redirect, manipulate. By now she was probably preparing explanations before Daniel even returned home. Tears, confusion, blame shifting, maybe even concern for his mental stress. "You do nothing tonight?" I said calmly. Daniel frowned slightly. "Nothing. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think they still have control," I answered softly. "Do not warn her. Do not accuse her. Just watch." He stared at me quietly for several seconds, then nodded once. Something changed in his expression during that moment. Not anger. Awareness. And awareness can become dangerous to people who survive by deception. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel followed my advice. He watched quietly, and once he started paying attention, the cracks in Vanessa's perfect performance began appearing everywhere. He called me almost every evening after work now, usually from his car before going inside the house. At first he sounded uncertain, like a man trying to convince himself there had to be some misunderstanding. But each conversation left him quieter than the one before. "She asked today whether I plan to update your power of attorney forms," he told me one rainy Thursday night, while windshield wipers clicked steadily in the background. I stood in my kitchen stirring canned soup on the stove. "What did you say?" I asked calmly. I told her I had not thought about it. Silence filled the line for a second. "Mom," he added carefully. She seemed disappointed. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Not concern, not compassion, strategy. Over the following days, more small details surfaced. Vanessa suddenly became unusually interested in my apartment lease. She suggested assisted living communities during dinner conversations, as though casually brainstorming future options. She even emailed Daniel brochures for luxury senior residences with phrases highlighted in yellow like peace of mind and full care support. Daniel forwarded one of the emails to me late one evening with only 4 words beneath it. "She never stops pushing." What hurt him most was not the money anymore. It was discovering how naturally deception had blended into his marriage. Vanessa still kissed him goodbye every morning, still hosted elegant dinners for charity boards and business guests, still smiled warmly across polished restaurant tables while discussing vacation plans for spring. From the outside, their life remained flawless. But Daniel had finally started noticing the timing of her questions, the way she monitored his reactions too closely, the nervous shift in her expression anytime my name entered conversation unexpectedly. One Sunday afternoon, he visited me carrying grocery bags filled with things I had stopped buying years earlier because they cost too much. Fresh salmon, real coffee, imported fruit. I watched quietly while he placed everything into my refrigerator one item at a time. "You used to love blueberries," he said softly while arranging them carefully on the shelf. I looked at the small carton for a moment before answering. "I still do." He stopped moving after that, just stood there staring at the nearly empty refrigerator with his jaw clenched tightly. "I cannot believe I let this happen," he whispered. I leaned gently against the counter. "Daniel, some people survive by controlling what others see. Vanessa did not fool you because you were stupid. She fooled you because you trusted her." But even as I said the words, I knew trust alone was not the full story. Wealth changes people slowly sometimes. Not always into cruel people, just distracted ones. Important meetings replace long phone calls. Business dinners replace Sunday visits. Years pass quietly until the people who once mattered most begin surviving in the background of your life instead of the center of it. Daniel looked older lately, more tired, as though awareness itself carried weight. "I checked another account yesterday," he admitted finally. "There were additional transfers I never noticed. Smaller amounts. Insurance reimbursements. Tax refunds connected to your records." My chest tightened. "How much?" "Almost 80,000. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator behind us. $300,000. Enough to change the course of someone's life completely. Enough to buy security, warmth, stability, time. Daniel sat down heavily at the small kitchen table and rubbed both hands across his face. She already hired contractors for another home renovation last month, he said bitterly. I thought she used investment profits. I looked toward the frosted kitchen window where snow drifted softly through pale afternoon light. Somewhere across town, Vanessa was probably still moving, confidently through her perfect world, believing she remained in control of the story. But control becomes fragile the moment people stop believing appearances. And for the first time since marrying her, my son had finally begun seeing what existed underneath the performance. New Year's Eve arrived wrapped in freezing rain and silver city lights reflecting across wet streets. Daniel insisted I attend the party at the estate that year, even though I told him I preferred staying home. Please come, he said quietly over the phone 2 days earlier. There are some things I need to finish. I understood immediately what he meant. Vanessa greeted me at the front door wearing a floor-length black dress with diamonds glittering softly against her throat. Anyone looking at her would have seen elegance, composure, wealth. She kissed my cheek lightly and smiled with perfect warmth. Margaret, you look wonderful tonight, she said smoothly. I thanked her and handed my coat to the valet while carefully studying her face. Not a single crack showed yet. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers while servers carried trays of champagne through crowds of investors, neighbors, and business associates dressed in expensive formal wear. A jazz quartet played softly near the staircase. Everywhere I looked, people laughed too loudly the way wealthy people often do at parties where everyone is trying to prove happiness to each other. Daniel moved differently that evening. Slower, more observant. He stayed close enough to Vanessa to watch her without appearing suspicious, and I noticed how often her eyes searched his expression when she thought nobody was paying attention. Fear changes people subtly at first. It sharpens attention, makes smiles arrive half a second too late. Around 10:30, Daniel approached me near the fireplace holding 2 champagne glasses. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I nodded once. And you? He glanced across the room, where Vanessa stood speaking to several guests near the piano. Not really. There was no anger in his voice anymore. Just exhaustion. During the past week, he had uncovered enough evidence to destroy every explanation she tried, offering him digital records, redirected statements, forged authorizations tied directly to devices registered in their home. Even the bank investigators had quietly confirmed the account changes were deliberate, not accidental. Yet somehow Vanessa continued behaving as though charm alone could still hold the truth together. At exactly 11:15, Daniel asked everyone to gather briefly for a New Year's toast. Conversations softened while crystal glasses lifted around the ballroom beneath the glow of hundreds of tiny white lights. Vanessa smiled beautifully beside him near the staircase, one hand resting lightly against his arm. From a distance, they still looked like the perfect couple featured in luxury magazines. Daniel thanked everyone for supporting his company through another successful year. He spoke about growth, opportunity, family. Then his voice changed slightly, softer, more personal. There is one person here tonight, he said carefully, who spent years believing she had been forgotten. The room grew quieter. Vanessa's posture stiffened almost invisibly beside him. Daniel reached inside his suit jacket and removed a thin folder. My heart remained strangely calm as I watched him open it. 4 years ago, he continued slowly, I began sending monthly financial support to my mother after my father passed away. Silence spread through the ballroom now. Guests exchanged uncertain glances while Vanessa's smile finally began slipping at the edges. Daniel held up several pages quietly. Unfortunately, he said, someone else received that money instead. Vanessa turned toward him sharply then. Daniel, she interrupted with a soft laugh. This is neither the time nor place for financial misunderstandings. But Daniel did not look at her anymore. He walked slowly across the ballroom toward me and placed the folder gently into my hands before turning back toward the guests. There was no misunderstanding, he said quietly. The silence that followed felt enormous. Vanessa's face lost color so gradually that most people probably never noticed it happen. But I did, because for years, I had watched that woman control every room she entered through. Confidence alone. And confidence disappears quickly once truth enters the conversation. Daniel, she whispered carefully, You are upset right now? We can discuss this privately. He stared at her for several long seconds before answering. That is the problem, Vanessa. Everything important was always handled privately. Somewhere outside, fireworks began exploding faintly across the city skyline, while inside the ballroom nobody moved at all. The party ended long before midnight for most people that night. Even though the fireworks continued exploding across the city outside the tall ballroom windows. Guests left quietly in small groups, pretending not to stare, while coats were collected and luxury cars lined up beneath the falling snow. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but everyone understood enough to recognize a marriage collapsing in real time. Vanessa disappeared upstairs less than 20 minutes after Daniel confronted her publicly. She never returned to the ballroom. Daniel did not follow her. Instead, he remained standing near the fireplace long after the room emptied, one hand resting against the marble mantel while untouched champagne glasses sat abandoned around him. I watched my son carefully from across the room. For the first time in years, he looked like the little boy who used to stand silently in the kitchen after realizing he had broken something important. Not because he feared punishment, because he finally understood consequences. "Mom," he said quietly once the last guests had gone, "I am so sorry." I looked around the enormous ballroom one final time before answering. The flowers, the chandeliers, the polished floors. So much beauty covering something rotten underneath. "Daniel," I said softly, "you do not owe me apologies for another person's choices." His eyes filled slightly then, though he quickly looked away. I should have seen it. I walked slowly toward him, while distant fireworks painted flashes of silver and blue across the dark windows behind us. "People see what fits the life they want to believe they built," I answered gently. "You believed your wife was taking care of your family while you focused on everything else. That does not make you cruel, just absent." The truth landed heavily between us because it was honest. In the weeks that followed, everything changed quietly. There were no screaming arguments, no dramatic scenes, just lawyers, financial investigations, separate bedrooms, long silences inside a house that suddenly felt much too large for two people pretending nothing had happened. Vanessa tried several times to contact me directly at first. Long messages explaining misunderstandings, stress, banking confusion. One voicemail even ended with tears in her voice. I listened once before deleting it. Some apologies arrive only after consequences appear. By February, Daniel moved into a downtown condominium near his office while accountants and attorneys continued sorting through years of financial records. The newspapers never learned the full story, though rumors spread quietly among their social circles. Renovation projects stopped. Charity appearances disappeared. Vanessa's perfect life began unraveling not through scandal, but through absence. And absence has a way of speaking loudly in wealthy neighborhoods. Daniel visited my apartment every Sunday after that. At first, the conversations felt awkward, careful, shaped by guilt neither of us fully knew how to discuss. But slowly, little pieces of normal life returned. He fixed my broken heater himself one snowy afternoon after realizing how long it had not worked properly. Another weekend, he replaced the flickering kitchen light, while I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup the way I used to when he was little. Sometimes healing begins with very ordinary things. Early one March morning, I stood by my apartment window watching sunlight melt the last patches of winter snow from the parking lot below. The radiator hummed steadily behind me now, warming the room properly for the first time in years. On the kitchen counter sat fresh groceries Daniel dropped off the evening before. Blueberries, good coffee, fresh flowers in a glass jar. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and looked out quietly at the city waking beneath pale spring light. For years,